Hey guys, my name is Rob, and today we're unboxing and reviewing the 8Bitdo Ultimate 2. This is a wireless controller compatible with PC and Android, and kind of surprisingly not compatible with iOS or Nintendo Switch. This controller is, I think, most directly a follow up to the Ultimate 2C, though their naming system and order is a little confusing. Regardless, this gamepad appears to be very similar to the Ultimate 2C, but with a couple of key differences, so let's open it up and check it out. This is actually my first 8Bitdo controller. Their gamepads have always been on my radar, but for various reasons that we'll probably get into in this video, I've kind of postponed picking one up until now. I picked up the purple version because I like purple, but the Ultimate 2 is also available in both black and white. We've got a couple foam blocks here to protect and hold the gamepad in place. Then we've got the controller on top and the included charging base on the bottom. We'll check out the charging base first, which has the 8Bitdo logo on the front, and on the back a USB-C port for charging. And then on the bottom, we have a cover that comes off, and inside is the 2.4 gigahertz wireless adapter. It's actually also USB-C, which I think this is the first time I've seen that with any controller, but I'm not complaining. I much prefer USB-C. As with most recent controllers, you can plug the dongle into the base and the base into the PC for wireless connection. Also in the box, we just have a quick start guide, but you can scan the QR code on the bottom of it to access the full manual online. Then we have a USB-C cable, which is just a short 3-foot non-braided cable, just meant for charging. And that's it. Then we've got the controller itself, which has a protective cover, and then also has a plastic cover over the face buttons for whatever reason. Just first impressions here, I like the overall look of the controller, which is pretty basic other than the color, which was my choice. Clearly it's more of a Switch Pro style shape than Xbox, the grips are pretty much straight, and also it's a little bit smaller form factor. This is kind of one of the reasons I hadn't previously picked up an 8Bitdo controller because they do look a little on the small side. You guys are always making fun of me in the comments of my videos for having giant hands, and admittedly my hands are larger, so I do typically prefer bigger controllers for the sake of comfort. We'll see how much that affects my experience with the Ultimate 2. As far as features go, we have membrane face buttons, which I'm not a big fan of. I wish these were mechanical. They're also kind of loud and have a good bit of travel, so I just don't love them. I do understand this is a personal preference thing though, and some people would much rather have membrane face buttons than mechanical. We also have a membrane D-pad, which doesn't bother me nearly as much, and it does feel pretty good. We'll test it out in some Street Fighter or something to see how well it performs. The sticks are TMRs, which is the biggest difference between the Ultimate 2 and prior 8-Bitdo models, and the reason I was actually excited to pick this gamepad up. Based on my experience with other TMR sticks, I'm looking forward to testing these out. Other front inputs are the home button, used to turn the gamepad on and off, the menu and view buttons, and I think it's kind of funny that the symbols for these are plus and minus, but this controller isn't compatible with the Nintendo Switch. Then we have the square button and the star button, both of which are used for on-the-fly settings, which we'll go over, and we have the profile button. On top, the bumpers are micro switches, which feel good and sound great, and they're very easy to actuate anywhere on the button. And then the additional shoulder buttons labeled L4 and R4 are also micro switches, and they do feel good. But this is another thing that I was unsure about with 8-Bitdo controllers. I kind of thought the way these were positioned, touching the bumpers and triggers, might result in some inadvertent presses, so we'll see how that goes. Also on top, we have the pairing button, and of course the USB-C port. We do have linear Hall effect triggers, which feel okay. They're not padded, so you do get that plastic hitting plastic sound and feel, but we also have trigger locks, which are micro switch, but feel and sound different than any other mouse click style trigger locks I've tested. I'm not sure how to describe it. They're just kind of strange, very different, and I'm honestly not sure how I feel about it. Then we have the two rear buttons, which feel very good. The placement is good, they feel responsive, and they're also low profile and almost flat against the back shell. Then also on the back, we have the pins for the charging dock and the mode switch, which changes the gamepad between 2.4 gigahertz and Bluetooth modes. For on-the-fly customization, there's not a ton really, but we'll go over it here. And we'll start with the lighting adjustments because man, this is bright. If you hold the star button, you can use up and down on the D-pad to adjust the brightness. This is only in some lighting modes though, such as the default mode, which is the light tracing mode. I think this mode is kind of cool. It's a light blue by default, but it traces the movement of the joysticks in purple. And then the tracing effect also reacts to the D-pad on the left light ring and the face buttons on the right one. It also responds to pressing the bumpers and triggers. You can also cycle through different lighting modes by pressing the star button by itself, and other modes have other adjustments, such as this mode, which is called Ring of Fire. D-pad up and down with the star button on this will change the speed of the ring, but unfortunately you can't adjust the brightness in this mode. There's also a solid color mode, and in this mode, D-pad up and down will adjust the brightness, and D-pad left and right will cycle through different color options. The last lighting mode is just off, so that is an option. For now, I'm just going to leave it on the light tracing mode. The other function of the star button is turbo, and you can activate turbo on any button, trigger, or bumper by holding that button and then pressing the star button. The indicator light will then flash when you press that input to indicate the turbo is engaged. You can turn turbo off by repeating the process. You can also set auto turbo by holding an input and then double clicking the star button, but this works differently than other auto turbos I've seen before. If you turn it on, that input fires continuously unless you're holding that button down rather than being like an on off button. The square button is used to program the rear and extra shoulder buttons. You hold the rear button you want to program, then press the target button and the square button. When you program a button this way, the indicator light flashes anytime you press that input. And honestly, I thought this was weird, so I pulled up Gamepad Tester just to make sure it was functioning correctly, and it is. There's no turbo going on here or anything. It's just flashing if you're pressing an input that was programmed using the square button. Lastly, we have the profile button, and you can see here there are three lights under the profile button, and typically you can cycle through those, but I only have one set up, so that's all it's cycling through here. So technically there are four profiles, the onboard profile and the three you can set up in the app. It's worth noting that you can't adjust the brightness of the RGB lighting for any of the app profiles on the fly. I don't know why, I don't see anything about that in the manual, but for this profile I set up using the software, it will not allow me to adjust the brightness, which is just kind of weird. The inputs I have programmed to the rear and extra shoulder buttons also don't cause the indicator light to flash the way they do if you set them up on the gamepad itself, and it won't let me reprogram those inputs on the fly either. I have to switch to the onboard profile in order to reprogram using the square button. As I said, the on the fly customization is pretty limited, but there is quite a bit more you can do in the app, and we'll go over that now. This is the 8BitDo Ultimate Software V2, which you can use to customize and update the Ultimate 2. If you go to the Update tab, it shows you the available firmware versions and shows which one the gamepad is on. I've already updated, so I'm on version 1.03, which is the latest version. Then if we go into the Profile tab, we can customize current profiles or create new ones. I've already set up one profile, but we'll go ahead and do a new one here to go through the settings. We'll assign this to Profile 2, and then we can click on it to customize the profile. Now we have several tabs at the top, and the first one is Mapping. As you can see here, we can remap most of the front buttons on the controller, excluding the Home, Star, Square, and Profile buttons. Unfortunately, you can only assign gamepad inputs, no keyboard and mouse mapping with the Ultimate 2, and oddly, you can map the Home button somewhere else even though the Home button itself isn't mappable. Then you can swap to the back of the gamepad to map the additional inputs, and you have the same options here. The next tab is for macros, which looks pretty much the same, but the difference here is that you can record macros to assign to the buttons rather than single inputs. I was really hoping when I went in here I could record keyboard inputs, but I tried and that's not the case, so I'm a little disappointed about that. You can click Start in the right corner to record the macro and then enter whatever combination of inputs you want or need. You can also set the interval between each input individually, or you can make it uniform. The next tab is for the sticks, and unfortunately this is pretty basic. We are able to adjust the dead zones, which is really the most important setting for the sticks, and we can flip the axes as well as swap the joysticks or the left joystick and D-pad, but no response curve settings, no circularity settings, or any of the more advanced settings that we see with some third-party gamepads, particularly from FlyDigi and Big Big One, or Mojang, I guess, since they've rebranded. The next tab is for the triggers, and not a lot here either, though that's to be expected. You can set the min and max range, and you can swap the triggers. You can also see here that the trigger stops do enable a software hair trigger mode, so when they're engaged, the micro switch trigger registers as an on-off button basically. Next is the vibration tab. The Ultimate 2 only has grip vibration. You can adjust left and right individually from 0 to 5. Then there's the RGB tab, and here there's a page for adjusting colors and also a custom page, which only has one option. You can enable or disable syncing the left and right RGB circles. On the default page, you can customize the different lighting modes, including changing the colors for the Ring of Fire and light tracing modes. And at the very bottom of the tab, you can adjust the brightness. So although we can't change the brightness for these profiles using the star button on the gamepad, we can change it with the app. Finally, the last tab is for motion or gyro control. Here you can choose whether to map gyro to the left or right stick, set a button to activate, either as press and hold to enable or press to enable and disable, and you can set the sensitivity and dead zone compensation. And that pretty much does it for the app, so now we'll jump over to some testing. We'll start with polling rate, and as usual, I'm testing wired first. 8BitDo advertises 1000 Hz wired and wireless for the Ultimate 2, so that's what we're expecting. And that's about what we're getting here. It's coming in at 941. And then wireless is almost identical at 939 with the exact same jitter, so very consistent wired and wireless. Next, we'll look at the resolution test results from Stick Analyzer tool, and we're getting about 765 resolution points, which is good. Not the highest we've tested, but very solid. And then lastly, we'll look at gamepad tester. I do have the dead zone set to 0 here, and as you can see, the sticks are sometimes bouncing back to a perfect resting value, but not always. That said, I've since played with this gamepad a ton, and I have no drift in game, so they're very close. I will say that I originally was a little concerned about this circularity test, and that was partially because I didn't see anything in the user manual about recalibrating the sticks, but as it turns out, there is a method for doing so by holding both bumpers and the plus and minus buttons for 8 seconds. Then, as is standard with most gamepads, rotate both sticks 3 times, fully depress both triggers 3 times, and then press the same 4 buttons again to exit calibration mode. After I recalibrated, I retested the circularity, and it did come out much more even. So if you do pick up one of these gamepads, I would recommend checking your circularity out of the box and recalibrating if necessary. But that's pretty much always a good idea with any Hall or TMR controller. Kind of related, one other setting that wasn't mentioned in the manual is zero dead zone mode. If you hold plus and minus for 5 seconds, it switches the dead zones of both sticks to 0, and if you repeat the process, it goes back to the default dead zones. Of course, if you're setting 0 dead zone in the app, you don't really need this, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. So, conclusions. Let's get the negative stuff out of the way first. I'm not a fan of the face buttons. I wish they were mechanical, and barring that, I wish they were a little less squishy, with a little less travel distance. I just don't care for them. The Ultimate 2 software is just okay. It has most of the main things, but it's lacking in advanced customization options, particularly in terms of the sticks. Though, to be clear, the sticks are great. More on that in a minute. And what can I say? Size matters. The Ultimate 2 is a bit small, enough so that it's not the most comfortable controller, at least for me. But that said, this controller is awesome. I've been trying not to get too carried away with the hype around TMR sticks, but if I had to list the gamepads I find to be the most accurate and responsive for FPS games in particular, these would be my top 3. The 8BitDo Ultimate 2, the Big Big Juan or Mojang Blitz 2, and the GameSurge Cyclone 2, with an honorable mention to GameSurge Tarantula Pro, since it's likely the reason I would put it a step below these is because I personally am less proficient with symmetrical sticks. Besides the sticks, I also ended up loving the placement of the L4 and R4 buttons. I've played a ton of hours with this gamepad and I've had exactly 0 unintentional inputs, so that concern was definitely unwarranted. In fact, I actually like this layout better than that of the Blitz 2, which is the controller that converted me to a fan of the 2 plus 2 extra button layout in the first place. Although I was skeptical before, I think I actually prefer these trigger stops as well. They're honestly just a little quieter and you still feel that satisfying click. Overall, despite a couple of things I'd like to change, this controller is easily one of my favorites I've tested, and it's one I'm likely to put a ton of time into. At $60, I feel like the Ultimate 2 is a very strong competitor in the current market. Just comparing to my top controllers, it's cheaper than the Blitz 2, though it does like mechanical face buttons and keyboard mapping. It's just slightly more expensive than the Cyclone 2, which also has those features, but the Cyclone 2 also only has 2 rear buttons and no extra claw grip buttons unless you modify it like I did mine, so there are trade offs for sure. Long story short, I don't think you can go wrong with this controller for PC gaming, and if you prefer membrane face buttons and don't care about or ever utilize keyboard mapping, this might be exactly what you're looking for. I hope this video helped you out, and if so, please subscribe if you haven't already. Likes are also appreciated, and I do try to react and respond to as many comments as possible. I'll be doing more reviews regularly, so I hope to see you back here again soon. Thanks for watching.